Pansegwakia. My name is Melina Laboucan-Massimo. I am the Senior Director and Co-founder of Indigenous Climate Action. I am Laboucan Cree, born in my home community of Little Buffalo, Alberta, and today I will be your host for today's event. Thank you all for joining us. I am calling in from unceded Lekwungen territory in so-called British Columbia. I'm so excited to be here with you all. Today we'll hear from Oscar-nominated actor and activist Mark Ruffalo, Gidimt'en Checkpoint spokesperson slato Molly Wickham, West Coast Environmental Law Association staff lawyer Eugene Kung, and Wet'suwet'en Hereditary Chief Na'moks. But first, let me set the stage of why we are here today. Today we are launching the No More Dirty Banks campaign. We're kicking off this No More Dirty Banks campaign by targeting the Royal Bank of Canada because of their current funding of the Coastal GasLink pipeline. The Royal Bank of Canada owns City National Bank, which is also known as the Hollywood Bank of the Stars. As a part of our No More Dirty Banks campaign launch, we have released a letter signed by over 65 Hollywood celebrities, which is out and stands today in Variety magazine, and also you can see on our No More Dirty Banks website. This letter is demanding that City National's bank parent company, Royal Bank of Canada, withdraw financial support from Coastal GasLink pipeline effective immediately. We are here to support Wet'suwet'en Indigenous land defenders fighting the construction of a 416-mile Coastal GasLink pipeline slated to cut under the sacred Wet'suwet'en River without the consent of the Hereditary Chiefs. With an estimated price tag of $6.6 billion, the Royal Bank of Canada is the top commercial bank backing the Coastal GasLink pipeline. So right now, RBC is willingly financing destruction from Wet'suwet'en homelands to my homeland in my community and many others in the tar sands by funding the dirtiest fossil fuels in the world. So unfortunately, RBC's the Royal Bank of Canada's violation of Indigenous rights is nothing new. In fact, I spoke at RBC's shareholder meeting in 2009 to question the bank's financing of the Alberta tar sands, which has been devastating to our communities, detrimentally impacting our land, our air, and our water, and exacerbating the climate crisis. The area of destruction we are talking about in the tar sands is equal to destroying, fragmenting, and creating an industrial wasteland the size of the state of Florida. So bankrolling the Coastal GasLink pipeline isn't just the latest example of RBC's role in covering up and violating Indigenous rights, failing to uphold free, prior, and informed consent as outlined in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, of which Canada has adopted and the United States has endorsed. In my community, we cannot drink our water because of RBC's investments. We want to make sure the Wet'suwet'en peoples and communities everywhere still can. So we'll be back at RBC's shareholder meeting again this year on April 7th. So let's talk a little bit about climate impacts. In 2021 alone, estimates reveal Canada experienced a $2 billion in climate damages from extreme weather like flooding and summer hailstorms. This is only a fraction of the true cost, not only to mention the devastating impacts of the climate crisis on our lives and livelihoods. Meanwhile, within just 5 years of signing the Paris Climate Accord in 2015 and the end of 2020, the world's 60 largest banks finance fossil fuels to the tune of $3.8 trillion. Our financial system is funding the climate crisis, and unfortunately, we are going in the wrong direction to adequately address this crisis that we all find ourselves in. So, RBC claims to be a leader in climate-conscious banking, but since acquiring City National Bank in 2015, the Royal Bank of Canada has remained Canada's #1 fossil fuel bank and the 5th largest funder of fossil fuels in the world, to a tune of $160 billion. So let us be clear. The financing of fossil fuels is creating climate chaos. When it comes to the Coastal GasLink, Wet'suwet'en Hereditary Chiefs have opposed the frack gas pipeline since it was first proposed a decade ago. Now resistance has been increasing against the pipeline construction as drilling is getting closer to drilling under their sacred river, the Wickham, which is a source of their drinking water and has been since time immemorial. Our demands are clear. Withdraw support from the Coastal GasLink pipeline effective immediately. Uphold, affirm, and respect the rights of Indigenous peoples, and stop funding fossil fuel expansion, which is exacerbating the climate crisis. Today, together, we are demanding that the Royal Bank of Canada, which owns the City National Bank, which is an RBC company, and banks everywhere, no longer finance the violation of Indigenous rights, fossil fuels, and climate chaos. So before I pass it to our first speaker, Mark Ruffalo, let's watch a video which is premiering today on our No More Dirty Banks website. Hi, thank you.
Right now, major banks like the Royal Bank of Canada are financing a fracked gas pipeline bulldozing through the land of the Wet'suwet'en Nation in northern British Columbia, Canada. The Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs never consented to this pipeline construction through their territories, which would risk the sacred headwaters of the Wickham River. But here's where it gets complicated. The Supreme Court of Canada recognized Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs as rightful title holders of the land. But corporations still get away with consulting only elected leadership put in place by the colonial government and not the rightful title holders. And what makes this even more urgent is a recent militarized police violence by the Canadian Police, the RCMP. For the last 3 years, and as recently as last November, the RCMP violently arrested and detained non-violent Indigenous land defenders and journalists.
You're trespassing on Wet'suwet'en land!
Publicly, RBC makes grand commitments to respect Indigenous rights, ethical investing, and climate action promises. But not only is RBC funding this pipeline to the tune of $315 million, it is the linchpin to a $6.5 billion loan backed by 26 other banks. Even though RBC has made commitments to Indigenous human rights, they continue to fund Coastal GasLink's violence against the Wet'suwet'en people.
This is our land, our sacred headwaters, Wickham, which is the lifeblood of our entire nation. CGL is racing to complete drilling to microtunnel under the Wickham without the consent of the hereditary chiefs. RBC's financial ties to this project make them responsible for endangering our drinking water, our salmon, and criminalizing us as Wet'suwet'en people on our own land. RBC's AGM is coming up on April 7th. They'll be announcing their sustainable business practices and the immense profits to their shareholders and to the public. Help us hold them accountable for funding genocide.
So we need to get this message out. Please share this video on social media and take action by signing the letter to RBC at nomoredirtybanks.com. So now let's hear from Oscar-nominated actor and activist Mark Ruffalo on why this is so important to him and why he joined over 65 celebrities, artists, directors, and musicians to demand that RBC end fossil fuel finance. Thank you, Mark, for joining us today.
I'm happy to be here. I'm honored to be here and I'm honored to be here with you, Melina, Chief Na'moks, Slato, and Eugene. And thank you to the press and anyone who's tuned in. I'm part of one of the 65 celebrities, artists, musicians, producers, directors, and agents from Hollywood who've signed on to this letter requesting that RBC and City National Bank, the Bank of the Stars, stop funding the Coastal GasLink pipeline that is now trespassing on land that they have not gotten permission to transverse, to stop funding what has essentially become the brutalization of the Wet'suwet'en people and their allies who are defending the sovereignty of their land and traditions, and to stop funding what is ultimately nothing more than a modern-day land theft and the active erasure of the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs' title to their land and an active systemic muting of their independent and sovereign voices. Now, since the Supreme Court's decision that awarded the title of this land to the hereditary chiefs, RBC has not taken the time to listen to nor consult the hereditary chiefs. This is the bank that tells us in all their literature that they want to honor First Nations rights and work with First Nations people. But it took them 25 years to actually sit down and speak with the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs. 25 years. And not once during the last decade of TransCanada Energy and Enbridge trying to force pipelines through the Wet'suwet'en people's sacred lands, their Yinta, their burial sites, their berry patches, their creeks and wetlands, their cultural sites and hunting grounds, has RBC been willing to meet with the chiefs face to face until a little over 2 weeks ago. And only when a high-profile client insisted that they meet with them. It's not right. What RBC says about working with Indigenous people or honoring the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous people, it's just not true. Now, RBC wants us all to believe that they're working with First Nation people, listening to them, consulting with them. Unless, of course, those First Nation people say no. And at that point, at that moment, those First Nation people seem to no longer exist to RBC, or in this case, they never actually ever existed. But I'm a man who believes in hope of action and the decency of people to do the right thing. Do I think that RBC, Dave Mackay, John Stackhouse, or Lindsay Patrick of RBC are bad people? I don't want to, but I do believe they've been duped by TransCanada Energy. I've met with most of these people in private on this issue to no avail. Sometimes public pressure like this is what makes people see things in a more honest, moral light. It is still my hope that when we all put pressure on them and the bank, that they will see the problem in the clear light of day, that the Canadian people will see the truth in a clear-headed way, and that RBC will stop funding these faulty pipelines and the fossil fuel extraction that is destroying the world for our children. The signatories on this letter, City National Bank's clients, have core values that RBC is violating. We do not want to leave our bank. We like City National Bank, but at the end of the day, we cannot let our money in any way be associated with the brutalization and erasure of any First Nations people and the extraction of fossil fuels. It's as simple as that. Not while the world burns around us and causes so much loss and suffering. Now, at this point, the most effective thing any of us can do is pull our money out of institutions that continue to fund the fossil fuel industry. I invite you all to join our campaign. Check out the website. Put pressure on RBC. Call them out. Call out Dave Mackay and consider dropping them if they don't do this and stop this. Today, there are options for clean banks. There are places we can put our money that don't fund these monstrosities, where there weren't several years ago. Now that we know all of this, now that our eyes are opened, we can't relearn our ignorance, so now we must act. If we call ourselves good people, then we have to act now. And the quickest way to do that is through money. This is a question of humanity. The one thing the world keeps showing us over and over again is our common humanity, our common relationship to each other, whether it's the pandemic or it's the war in Ukraine. We're bound to each other. We have a responsibility to each other. And it's time for good people and privileged people like us to do the right thing, to make other people, good people, uncomfortable. That's the only way we're going to break through this system of racism, neglect, and harm. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll be having questions a little bit later.
Thank you, Mark, so much for your powerful words. Very, very powerful words. Next, now we'll hear from Slato Molly Wickham, Gidimt'en Checkpoint spokesperson. Slato has been fighting the Coastal GasLink pipeline for over 10 years, including in the face of the Canadian colonial government, which has pushed through $20 million in police enforcement, even amidst severe flooding in the region. She'll talk about her firsthand experience on the front lines of land and water defense. Thank you, Slato, for joining us today.
Denise, Tsakaise, Skaise, Sai Slato Sydney, Gidimt'en Checkpoint. Thank you so much for having me today. And my name's Slato, Molly Wickham, and I hold the name in the Cassia House, Grizzly Bear House of the Wet'suwet'en Nation of the Gidimt'en Clan. I just want to talk a little bit about what this means to me, this movement and this resistance to the Coastal GasLink pipeline. This is more than an issue about one pipeline. This is a very sacred issue to me about our Wet'suwet'en, protecting our water, our clean drinking water, and our salmon spawning river. But this is also about being free to be who I am as a Wet'suwet'en woman. It's about us being free to live who we were meant to be as Wet'suwet'en people. And right now, what's happening in so-called Canada is an erasure of Indigenous people, a removal of Indigenous people from our lands. So although this is about this pipeline specifically, this has to do with our ability to be who we are on our land without being forcibly removed, without having violence done to us, without being undermined by the Canadian government and private corporations. Canada has a long history of colonial genocide on Indigenous people. They have a very dark history, which they have attempted to hide by undermining our traditional governance system, by imposing illegal Indian Act Band Council systems, and by removing our children from our communities and our territories. They have tried to hide all of this from the public, and now they are using private corporations like Coastal GasLink and international financial institutions like RBC, the parent company of CNB, to further remove Indigenous people from our territories and to destroy everything that we rely on as people, to destroy our future generations and their ability to sustain themselves as human beings, something that we all need: clean drinking water, healthy foods, something that our culture relies on, that we cannot be Wet'suwet'en people without a healthy land base, that we cannot have our traditional governance system without a healthy land base. And we think about the genocide that our people have experienced, and this is not something that is just historical. This is something that is happening right now and that everybody should know about and that everybody should be taking action against. I am living proof of the violence and the genocidal tactics that private corporations like CGL are using, and that Canada is using through their force of the Canadian police, to remove Indigenous people from our land, to make it unbearable for us to live there, to destroy everything to the degree that we can no longer sustain ourselves on our own homelands where our ancestors have lived for thousands of years. In 2019, there was a militarized raid at Gidimt'en Checkpoint, which is a reoccupation site of our territory. For 3 years, we've been living there, reoccupying an ancient village site that our people used to use. In 2019, they brought in lethal overwatch, K9 units, assault rifles, tactical teams with snipers to arrest myself and other Gidimt'en land defenders, including an elder, and removed us from our territory and imprisoned us. Again, in 2020, the RCMP and Canada and CGL, hand in hand, launched a 5-day militarized raid on Wet'suwet'en villages and encampments on our territory, where they arrested Wet'suwet'en matriarchs, hereditary chiefs, and removed people from our territories once again with lethal overwatch, assault rifles, tactical officers dropped in by helicopters to surround unarmed Wet'suwet'en people. Most recently, in November of 2021, we experienced one of the most violent raids yet on Wet'suwet'en territory. This was just months after a letter was sent to RBC asking them to meet with us
to talk about the atrocities that were happening on our territory, where we got a generic response talking about how RBC respects Indigenous people and respects Indigenous rights, and believed that Coastal GasLink had done the proper consultation and due diligence to go ahead with this project. And meanwhile, within months of that response, I was surrounded in my home on the territory with Indigenous youth and other land offenders while they pointed assault rifles in my face. All I could hear was the canine units snarling and whining to get at us. There were sniper rifles that were trained on us by tactical officers who had been dropped in by helicopter, team after team after team, to surround us, unarmed, peaceful Indigenous people that are upholding our law. I was removed from that home at gunpoint, arrested with media, members of the press, and imprisoned for 5 days in 7 different jail cells in 3 different cities. This is the project. These are the human rights violations and the violations of Indigenous rights that RBC is funding. They are bankrolling the removal of Indigenous people at gunpoint for this project to come in and destroy our sacred headwaters with Zinkwa. We are doing this for our future generations, for the lifeline of our whole nation, that we are a salmon people. We rely on that as our staple food. Zinkwa is where all of our salmon come to spawn. It is so sacred to us and informs all of the laws that we uphold. We are arrested and removed from our territories. We are erased by corporations and financial institutions like RBC, who say that they don't care about what happens to us. We are not relevant in their eyes. We are human beings with a right to live as free Wet'suwet'en people on our own land. We have a right to have clean drinking water for our future generations, the river that my children drink water from every single day, that our salmon have been spawning in for thousands of years. This is what we are upholding. We are not violent. We are not radicals. We are not protesters. We are Indigenous people upholding Wet'suwet'en law. And RBC met with us on February 25th, and we shared all of our experiences with them. We made ourselves vulnerable and talked about the violations that were happening so that they knew exactly what they were funding. And they didn't have the decency to meet with us again and bring their CEO, Dave McKay, to the meeting to come and meet us face to face with a decision about whether or not they were going to pull funding from the Coastal GasLink pipeline. They canceled the meeting. That is how much our lives are worth to them, that they would cancel the meeting and not have the decency to meet us face to face to tell our hereditary chiefs from their leadership if they were going to continue to fund the genocide of Wet'suwet'en people and the genocide of our future generations and our Zinkwa, our most sacred headwaters. Please help us in defending our land, in calling out RBC and holding people accountable. I would say.
Hi, thank you, Slato. Thank you for your profound words. Now let's hear from Eugene Kung, a human rights lawyer at West Coast Environmental Law Association, who will discuss the implications of the 1997 Supreme Court of Canada's recognition of Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs as rightful title holders in the Gidimt'en decision as it relates to the due diligence. Hi, thank you, Eugene, for joining us today.
Thank you, Melina, and thank you to Mark and Slato and Na'moks for continuing to draw attention to this really important issue. I'm just going to make a few comments on the impacts and the long-term implications of the 1997 Delgamuukw-Gisdaywa case, which was released by the Supreme Court of Canada. It was historic because for the first time, a Canadian court recognized the existence of Aboriginal title after a century plus of denial and dispossession. It also confirmed that the Wet'suwet'en and Gidimt'en hereditary chiefs were the rightful title holders. And while it stopped short of determining where that title land existed, it left that for future negotiations or a future title. That has never happened to this point. But the fact remains that the Supreme Court of Canada has recognized that Aboriginal title exists and that the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs are the rightful title holders. This case was built upon in 2014 in the Silcotin decision, where the Supreme Court did actually apply Aboriginal title for the first time. And one of the things that the court said was, whether or not there is a declaration of Aboriginal title, governments and companies can avoid charges of infringement or failure to adequately consult by obtaining the consent of interested Aboriginal groups. So they've set this standard that, while it may be in law a certain question, in practice, getting consent from the rightful title holders is a necessary step. And, unfortunately, we have not seen this decision followed and enacted by Crown governments. It's hard for me to imagine, with all of the academic articles, commentary, and so on that followed that 1997 case, not to mention an entire textbook that's taught in high schools in Wet'suwet'en territory about Wet'suwet'en law and Wet'suwet'en governance. It's hard to imagine another Indigenous legal tradition in Canada with more recognition and analysis by Canadian institutions. And what we're seeing is a continuation of a long pattern and long history of denial and erasure and dispossession, a sort of colonial contempt that is applied to these cases as they come out of the Supreme Court of Canada. And I want to, just really reiterate that the consultation framework that's set out by Canadian courts is a minimum. It is a legal minimum. And there's no requirement for banks or the government to continue to aim for the floor and do the legal minimum. And in fact, as we are seeing today, doing so actually causes more challenge and more conflict down the line. And ignoring these legitimate and important rights issues is incredibly detrimental, not only to obviously the people who are being targeted by the RCMP, but also to those like RBC who are investing. RBC claims that they've done extensive due diligence on this project before investing in Coastal GasLink, including following the guidelines set out in the Equator Principles, to which they are a signatory. But for me, how I would respond to that is that it seems if your due diligence have not identified and anticipated this level of resistance and have not anticipated that it would require 3 massive and violent militarized raids to even start moving forward with this project, then at the very least, I can say there is major room for improvement in that due diligence process, where identifying these very publicly available and well discussed and well analyzed issues should be plainly obvious. And so, things like a more robust Indigenous rights policy that takes into account Indigenous laws as well as Canadian laws is a starting point. And we should not even be here today if in fact that due diligence was done fully and properly. And this is where there is space for improvement, to take the lessons from what's happening here, to make decisions that are going to impact not only Wet'suwet'en people, but us all globally who are facing the climate crisis, and that moving forward, that banks and other financial institutions are taking seriously the climate crisis as well as Indigenous rights and the need to obtain consent. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eugene, for your insightful words. So now to close, it is my honor to introduce Hereditary Chief Na'moks. Hereditary Chief Na'moks currently is the highest ranking chief of the Tsa'u River Beaver Clan, which is one of the 5 clans of the Wet'suwet'en Nation. The title he carries as Chief Na'moks is thousands of years old, as are all the hereditary chiefly titles. Thank you, Chief Na'moks, for joining us here today. Hi.
Howdy. My voice will be a little shaky. I'm quite emotional. This is so powerful what we're doing today, calling on the world to stand, not only with us, but with all humanity. Everything that has happened to our people and our lands with the support of financial institutions. When you talk about money, it doesn't have a conscience. Humans do, and that's what we're calling upon, the actual human race to be human. You could tell by what the speakers had said, we're not regarded as humans. We're simply a number. I carry a number. All Indigenous people do. And what that number is a stats card. And the first 3 numbers of that tells you what village you're registered from the federal government. So we can't be just numbers. We have to be human. We have to be treated as such. When we do what we do to protect our lands and waters, we do that for everybody. We know what happened at COP26. They did their meetings, and at the 11th hour, they said, no, nothing's going to happen. And here we are being criminalized, locked in jails, taken to court in dog kennels for doing the right thing. The human aspect is being left out when you talk about financial institutions, governments, and industries moving forward with such projects. When we do our part, all we do is ask everybody else to do the same thing. We have to remember every voice does matter. Every action does matter. What you do does matter to everybody. When we talk about the betterment of all, we mean it. We as hereditary chiefs, we have high responsibilities. The very water that we are protecting and the lands and the rights, human rights, Indigenous rights, is for everybody. The water that flows from our lands, they go to the north coast of British Columbia as well as to the south coast. And what we do in British Columbia affects Canada, affects North America, affects the entire planet. So when we speak, all we ask is to be listened to. We have a very high word in our language. Respect, wagus, and we're not being treated in that manner that we treat others. That's all we ask. When you want to respect land, air, water, everything that all humans rely on, you have to look right at where the problem is. The problem is that we are not here to make a dollar. What we are here to do is to protect what is happening on this planet with climate change. What we are here to do is to be together. What we are here to do is to make sure that everybody does their part. It really does not take much for a human person to look themselves in a mirror and say, you know what, I am human. I can do my part. I can stand together and I can make a difference. When we do the right thing at the right time for the right reason, there is nothing wrong with standing up and saying, that's enough. We need to do our part. When we deal with financial institutions that fund such projects as these, we can do our part. We can move. We could put the pressure on them. When they label themselves as Bank of Stars or the largest financial, one of the top 5 in the world, then why are they doing that? We have so many options for green energy. If they'd have listened to us at the beginning, we wouldn't be in this situation right now. And you know what? It's never too late to make a change. Those changes you have to make yourself. It is your voice that makes the difference. It is your actions that make the difference. When we watch the world go through the troubles that's going through, the very source of it is money. Money does not have a conscience. Human beings do. When they treat us the way they do, as if we're non-existent, as if we're not human, that is the propaganda they want people to believe. Now, if you downplay somebody and make them feel that they're nothing and have the world believe they're nothing, then they win. We've always been peaceful. We always will be peaceful. You heard Slato on the violence that is brought to us. Right now, every day we face that. Right now, every day you can change that. Right now, every day we call upon you to step up. It is time to be heard. It is time to make choices and make those choices for the better of everybody. What we do is huge, but when they downplay the voices of people, Indigenous or non-Indigenous, you have to make your voice heard. You know, when they slam the door in your face, when you talk to them and they don't respect you, but when they want something, they come at you with axes and power saws to go through that very door.
Oh,
There's something wrong here. There is something very wrong when the world can stand by and say this is okay for what, $1 bill? Each of us depends on clean water. Each of us depends on clean air. Each of us depends on clean, healthy food. And this is what we're doing. I am so proud of my fellow chiefs and all of our Wet'suwet'en people, all of our supporters, knowing that we can drink out of those rivers and lakes as it is right now. I've been to a number of places where that cannot be done. In Canada, we have over 70 communities that have world water advisories. They have to have water shipped in. We as Wet'suwet'en, we drink out of those rivers. We don't want that gone. We know what affects us, affects everybody downstream. Water flows and the wind blows. What we do affects everybody. And all we do is ask people to wake up, speak up, stand up, be human. That's all we ask. You can't let financial institutions or elected officials tell you what's best for you when they're actually hurting the entire planet. We thank you all for standing with us because you all make a difference. You are all important and you all have a strong voice. Be human. Be together. Make a difference. Messiah Kyo.
Hi, thank you so much, Chief Na'moks, for your heartfelt and powerful words. I really appreciate it. You can join Chief Na'moks, Slato, Eugene, Mark, and dozens of celebrities that are rising in solidarity with Wet'suwet'en land defenders. Please first visit No More Dirty Banks to learn more and take action, and please save the date of April 7th to take action around RBC shareholder meeting. This is not the beginning of our fight, nor is it near the end, unfortunately. So we'll now move to the Q&A from members of the press via our press page. I'm going to ask number one question from City News. Why now and why celebrities? I'm going to pass this to Slato for the first part of the question and Mark to the second part of the question. Thank you.
It's really important and urgent, actually, for us to be taking this kind of action right now because of the imminent threat to the Wit'sinkwa River. Coastal GasLink has cleared the right-of-way through Wet'suwet'en territory, and they're planning within weeks to drill under the Wit'sinkwa. And once the drilling is complete, that could devastate our ability to drink the water forever. And so even the sediment alone from drilling underneath the river could destroy that for us. It's very imminent that we put as much pressure on the Coastal GasLink project and RBC, the folks who are funding it, CNB included, as the RBCs having as an RBC company to put pressure on them to stop the drilling immediately and withdraw funding.
I guess City News is asking why celebrities? I mean, why not? Celebrities are just as much a part of this as anybody else. But the real answer is who else is doing it? I mean, the world is burning around us. We're in the middle of a war because of fossil fuels. The signs couldn't be more urgent than they are right now. And we have 2 senators in the United States right now that are heavily funded by the fossil fuel industry on the Democratic side who believe in climate change, stymieing any kind of action today. Why celebrities? Because no one else is doing it. And because we have a voice and our voice reaches the people. And for some reason, we're trusted. Okay? We have this privilege and we have to use it for the right thing. None of this matters. If our children can't drink the water, they can't breathe the air, they can't go outside, the world burns around them. None of this means anything anymore. And we're all becoming a nerd to it. We're becoming desensitized to this insanity that we're living in. And governments have got to take action. But we see from COP that they've stopped. They're not taking action. Our politicians aren't doing what needs to be done. I used to say for years, we have to fund the fighters. We have to fund the fighters, the people on the front line, so that we can hear from them. And once we hear their stories and the horrors that they're living through, well, our hearts will open and our rationale and our minds will be activated, and we'll start making the changes that need to be made in order to solve this problem. And nothing has happened. And so now I say we have to fight the funders. We have to fight you people, RBC, and in relation, CNB. We have to go to you because it starts with you. I want to be with my kids today. I want to be with my family today. I want to go make moves. This is not how I plan to spend my life, but we can't count on anybody else anymore. It's up to us. We are the ones that we've been waiting for. And that's why we're doing this action. And that's why celebrities are taking part, because it's our money that's being used to do this shit. Sorry. It's obscene. We're living in a totally insane upside down world, and we have to do something. And so we're doing it. And so that's why now. And that's why celebrities.
Hi, thank you, Mark. It's very true. I myself, my first time on a blockade was at age 7 because my community has been invaded by oil, gas, logging, and fracking. So I hear you. I do not want to be spending my life doing this either. But here we are. And here we are asking the public to join us in these fights, because these are very real fights that we are struggling with day in and day out, daily lived realities of my community being poisoned every single day, experiencing massive oil spills. So this is a very real issue that we really need people to understand and know. This is happening on my body, in my community, and also with Wet'suwet'en people, communities that are impacted by fossil fuel extraction at the site of destruction, all the way down pipeline corridors. These are major issues that we really want people to understand. So I'm going to send it to the next question, because this is also very applicable today. Is it true that steel from the CGL pipeline is being sourced from a Russian oligarch's company? And I'm going to pass this over to Eugene.
Yes, thanks for the question. And unfortunately, it is true. And I think it speaks to how the oil and gas sector is global and is integrated. Specifically in terms of Coastal GasLink and Trans Mountain Pipeline, for that matter, much of the steel was sourced from a company called Evraz. They have a company based in Saskatchewan, but that shareholder of that company, the primary shareholder, is Roman Abramovich. There are 2 other of the so-called Putin list who are in leadership and large ownership positions of Evraz. So unfortunately, that is true. And just to echo Mark's point earlier around the connection between war and fossil fuels, I mean, how many wars have been fought over the last 50 years around fossil fuels? And the solution is not to further our infrastructure and dependence on it, but to move away.
I could take that.
Sure. Next question. So thank you, Eugene. Next question from Global News Vancouver. The war in Ukraine and the sanctions is forcing some nations to burn more coal. Wouldn't LNG be a healthy alternative until carbon-free alternatives are built? I would like to pass this to both Eugene and to Mark. So back to you, Eugene.
Thanks. Well, yeah, this is something that we've seen a lot of kind of political opportunism from the oil and gas sector, trying to use the invasion of Ukraine to increase oil and gas production in other places. What we know is that methane associated with so-called natural gas is 100 times more intense than carbon dioxide. We know that the technology, the energy, and the water used to frack this gas puts it close to where coal is at. And in fact, I think what we're actually seeing in response to the sanctions and to the war in Ukraine is that countries like Germany are accelerating their transition to renewable resources because you don't fight over the source of fuel, because you can't cut off the source of fuel when it comes to solar or wind. So I think it's actually the opposite. It's a suggestion, or it's an impetus to move faster towards renewables. I'll pass to Mark. Thanks.
The science is in on this. Bob Haworth from Cornell University just came out with a study that basically shows that methane is what has accelerated the climate models decades ahead of where we should be. It's methane. It's this move to methane from coal that is actually accelerating the climate catastrophe. It is 100 times more heat trapping than coal, than carbon dioxide. And our transition to it and the fugitive methane that is leaking around drilling, around transporting this stuff, around burning it, is what is causing the world to move so quickly into this catastrophe. It is a total sham and a lie created by the fossil fuel industry, the oil and gas industry, to say that methane is somehow better than coal. In actuality, coal is better than methane at this point. And that's the truth. And you can look it up. Bob Haworth, Dr. Robert Haworth at Cornell University. He has a beautiful paper on this. Follow the science. It'll tell you.
Thank you, Mark. So the fourth question is from CTV News. It is, what legislative methods do you plan to take to push banks to ending fossil fuel operations? This is a great question, and I'd like to pass it to both Eugene and Chief Na'moks.
Well, there's lots of space. I'll just very quickly touch on some high-level things and then pass it to Chief Na'moks. There are lots of problems in our current system, starting with the fact that our financial institutions do not have to report their full impact of what they're funding in terms of climate. We're talking about the emissions, not just from the projects, but from the burning of those projects. There's a lot of room for improvement on the reporting of those. Certainly, there are things around respecting and implementing the United Nations Declaration that we now have frameworks for in Canada, and would love to see, and we're really important to see private institutions implement those and follow through those in an earnest way. You know, we are all in this problem together, and whether it's climate change or Indigenous rights, the underlying issue is the same, and that is the failure of our society to fully appreciate and incorporate the risks that are involved with ignoring these two massive and intertwined issues. Thank you. I'll pass to Na'moks.
And for myself, it's quite simple. Like, they keep doing what they consider normal. They have this pattern, they have this modus operandi, and they don't want it changed because it disrupts them. But it's ourselves that can change that. Like, if you actually think about the funding that is put into these dirty projects that actually hurt the entire project, the world, you have to think about the very fact that they are unwilling to move to green projects. You know, the willingness has to be there, and the only ones that can do it. I simply do not rely on elected officials. I have no faith in what they go for, because it's industry that steers them. And the money that goes into it from these financial institutions, they don't even report to the people that deal with them, the humans that deal with them. So what has to be looked at is the very fact that people need to make that difference. Money talks, right? And in that their capacity, it is a human that controls it. It is a human that can make the difference. We have to change their pattern when it comes to governments and industry and financial institutions. You know, that same old mold that they want us to fit into, it's failed. It's an absolute failure. You know, science has proved exactly what we can say on our lands of why we've been here for century upon century upon century, and why we've governed ourselves as the land is us and we are the land. Because you take the very base of what you have to survive on and you look after it. Money is not the answer. Actually, right now, everything is being steered by it. The humanity of it is gone. You know, when we have the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, it's not being implemented properly. It's not being taken seriously. When we have the United Nations talk to Canada on what is happening to the Wet'suwet'en and other Indigenous people, it's not being taken seriously. See, that their pattern has to change, and only we can do it. All of us together can make huge changes. But that very pattern, that mold they have out there, break that mold. You know, at one time they told us that we had to stay within this here criteria because it was the only vehicle available. Well, I'll tell you, the wheels fell off, the motor blew up, and the wrong people were steering that vehicle. It is our turn. It always has been. But now it's time to stand up. Speak up. Be human. Messiah.
Another question that came in, which is, what would you like City, National Bank, and Royal Bank of Canada to do? And I just want to be very clear today that we have 3 demands. Withdraw support from the Coastal GasLink pipeline immediately, uphold, affirm, and respect the rights of Indigenous peoples, stop funding fossil fuel expansion, and please, please, together with us, please go to nomoredirtybanks.com to demand that the Royal Bank of Canada and Citibank, which is an RBC company, and banks everywhere no longer finance the violation of Indigenous rights, fossil fuels, and climate chaos. So for our final question as we wrap up today, I would like to ask them, all panelists, what's next for you? I will go to Slato, please, first. Thank you.
I just want to make it very clear that this project, the Coastal GasLink project, does not have the consent of the Hereditary Chiefs, and we will continue, as we have for thousands of years, to uphold Wet'suwet'en law and the Hereditary Chiefs' eviction of the Coastal GasLink pipeline project from January 4th, 2020. So this pipeline will not go through. This project, the investors in this project will never see the fruition of this project happen. They will never see the benefits from this project, and we will continue to live on our lands as Wet'suwet'en people, upholding Wet'suwet'en law forever. In the face of militarized raids, in the face of guns, in the face of violence, we will stand up and fight for what is rightfully our responsibility to ensure that is there for our future generations. Awitsa.
Hi, thank you, Slato. I will pass it to Mark.
What's next is we're going to celebrate when RBC and CNB, City National Bank, tell us all that they're going to take their funding out of these monstrosities. That's what's next. If not, then we're going to move. We're going to go to banks that are clean, that aren't financing the destruction of the world. Please join us. Go to our website.
No More Dirty Banks website.
Go to No More Dirty Banks and sign up, and we'll let you know what banks we're going to be moving to if they don't come through.
Thank you, Mark. And I'll pass it over to Eugene.
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing right now is the financial sector really revisiting their relationship with the fossil fuel industry in light of the climate crisis, recognizing that investing in this sector has material impacts both today and in the future that those same banks are going to pay for. You know, we think about banks as institutions as a safe place to keep our money, who kind of steward our money and the economy. And we saw how badly that can go when that doesn't happen, when that responsibility isn't taken seriously back in 2008. And so we're in this moment now where we need as a society a rapid shift. And we need to revisit what it looks like to not only stop ignoring the climate crisis, but to also stop ignoring the underlying land issues, especially in a place like Canada, where Wet'suwet'en people and other Indigenous nations remain and their laws remain valid, and we really need to incorporate that in how we make our decisions moving forward. That's the only way we're going to get out of this climate crisis.
Hi, thank you. And now to close, Chief Na'moks. Hi, thank you. What's next?
What's next is always what has been and what will be. What's next is will be what's open. What's next is as what's open as hereditary chiefs will do what's better for all. And as Mark said, we will celebrate. We will celebrate the humanity of being together. We will celebrate the fact that we will have clean water and clean air and clean food. And we will also celebrate the very fact that we can make a difference. You know, the law is on our side. Our law, in our language, Anuk Nuaten, our law, our own way. And number one is always the land. And then our governance system, our feasting system, and bring it into our halls and making laws that have always been there. We don't make them, we just follow up on them. The trespass law that we have about bringing pipelines on our territory, that is forever. It always has been forever. Our trespass laws are there because it's best for everybody. Destruction is not the answer. Love and compassion, responsibility, that's the answer. Nasai.
Spoken. Destruction is not the answer. This is not the beginning or the end of this fight. There are going to be actions in Los Angeles this Friday, an online gathering this Saturday, youth climate strikes on Friday, March 25th. This is leading up to the RBC shareholders meeting on April 7th, where we will be bringing our collective demands both inside and outside the meeting. So today, this concludes our press conference. Thank you so much for joining us. And please share this press conference on your social medias, so all your channels on socials, please. And join the movement at nomoredirtybanks.com. Hi, thank you so much for joining us today.